Did you know that one mistake could cost millions of lives? In this story, the USA decided the fate of the war in just a few days. If you're interested in the truth about World War II, subscribe and hit the like button. There are many shocking facts ahead. November 24th, 1944. Easley Field, Saipan, Mariana Islands. Imagine standing on that airstrip, feeling the raw power vibrating through the concrete beneath your feet as Lieutenant Colonel Robert K. Morgan pushed the throttles of his B-29 Superfortress Dauntless Dottie forward. Ahead of him stretched a formation of 110 aircraft from the 73rd Bomb Wing, all bound for Tokyo. What did the instruments whisper to Morgan? A story Japan's high command refused to believe. Turbo-Supercharger boost gauges climbing steadily, holding sea-level power at altitudes that would leave enemy fighters gasping for oxygen. On this morning, these silver giants were poised to reveal a technological chasm the Japanese could not bridge. Nestled within each engine, nacelle, were twin General Electric turbo-superchargers, devices more decisive than any gun or bomb. By harnessing exhaust gases to compress intake air, these mechanisms enabled the colossal Wright R3350 engines to sustain 2,200 horsepower at nearly 32,000 feet. Japanese fighters, built for nimbleness at medium altitude, found themselves fighting against the sky itself. Their engines, stripped of effective high-altitude supercharging, lost power in the thin air, leaving them virtually helpless. This mission marked the first B-29 raid on Tokyo from the freshly captured Marianas, a mere 1,500 miles from Japan's capital. Unlike the grueling missions from distant China, these bombers could strike, return, and strike again with relative safety. Pressurized cabins allowed crews to breathe as if on the ground, while Japanese interceptors struggled with crude oxygen systems that often failed entirely at extreme heights. As Morgan's bomber soared into the morning sky, followed by over 100 others, the technological superiority of American aviation became painfully clear. Rewind 5 months to June 15, 1944. The first strategic B-29 raid on Japan lifted off from Chengdu, China. 75 Superfortresses took to the sky that evening, but only 47 reached Yawata on Kyushu. The operation showcased the B-29's potential, but also the obstacles ahead. 7 aircraft were lost. 1 shot down over target, 1 destroyed on the ground after an emergency landing, 5 in operational accidents, and 57 airmen perished. Yet even this costly debut revealed a vulnerability in Japanese defenses against high-altitude bombing. On Kyushu, radar operators picked up the approaching formations. Air raid sirens screamed across Yawata, and pilots of the Imperial Army's 4th Sentai scrambled in their Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu twin-engine fighters. Climbing aggressively toward the bombers at altitudes between 8,000 and 21,000 feet, they found the challenge formidable. The Nakajima Ha-25 engines, each rated at 180 horsepower, struggled above 20,000 feet, producing barely 60% of their potential. Warrant Officer Sadamitsu Kimura managed to close on one B-29 Limber Dragon with its 12 crew members aboard. His attack succeeded, sending the Superfortress down in flames. But the victory came at a harrowing cost. Nearly all his ammunition spent, his engine dangerously overheating, Kimura barely returned to base. Around him, desperate pilots fired at the silver bombers, yet most attempts failed. The B-29s, equipped with advanced fire control systems, struck back with terrifying precision. Captain Teruhiko Kobayashi of the Imperial Army's 244th Sentai, one of Japan's finest fighter leaders, would later describe his unit's frustration in reports. American bombers operated at altitudes where Japanese fighters could barely maintain level flight, much less maneuver for combat. At nearly 25,000 feet, the B-29's speed, about 350 miles per hour, matched what Japanese interceptors could achieve in the thinning air. Reaching bombing altitude consumed excessive fuel, forced fighters to carry less ammunition, and left engines teetering on the brink of catastrophic failure. The secret behind American dominance was engineering Japan had pursued but never mastered. The General Electric Type B turbo-supercharger for the Wright R3350 engine was not merely a component, it was a revelation. Each B-29 engine carried within it a marvel of engineering. 2 turbo-superchargers that turned hot exhaust gases into whirling turbines spinning at more than 20,000 revolutions per minute. Picture those turbine wheels racing with a precision and fury that defies the eye, driving centrifugal compressors that forced air into engine intake manifolds at pressures equivalent to sea level, even at 30,000 feet above the ocean. The principle was as elegant as it was ruthless. Energy that would otherwise vanish into the sky was instead harnessed to keep these monstrous engines breathing and burning fuel efficiently at altitudes where ordinary engines would choke and stall. Each turbocharger cost roughly $150 to install, a modest price for performance equivalent to doubling the engine's displacement. Without them, the B-29 would have been just another heavy bomber, slow, vulnerable, and easy prey for enemy interceptors. Japan had experimented with turbo-supercharging as early as 1941. Engineers at Nakajima Aircraft Company pored over captured technical documents and obtained sample units through convoluted channels, studying them before the United States even entered the war. They understood the military advantage such devices could deliver, but comprehension alone could not bridge the gap between design and production. 3 years of Japanese development passed, yet no operational turbo-supercharged fighters ever reached meaningful numbers. The reasons expose the yawning industrial chasm separating Japan from America. Turbo-superchargers demanded metallurgy at the very edge of possibility. Turbine wheels spun within exhaust gases hotter than 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, enduring centrifugal stresses equal to thousands of pounds per square inch. Any imperfection, no matter how small, meant catastrophic failure. American manufacturers, led by General Electric, possessed the metallurgical knowledge, precision forging equipment, and rigorous quality control to produce reliable turbines. Japan, stretched thin by wartime demands, simply could not match these standards. Lieutenant Fumio Niwa, an engineering officer later assigned to evaluate captured B-29 components, documented his astonishment in Japanese archives. Examining a turbocharger salvaged from a crashed B-29 in China, he marveled at the precision of American manufacturing. Turbine blades, machined to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, balanced so perfectly they could spin at top speed without vibration. The high-temperature alloys were beyond Japanese industrial capability. Even the bearings, designed to function under extreme heat while maintaining flawless alignment, represented craftsmanship Japan could not reproduce. What made American superiority even more devastating was its systematic nature. At General Electric's plant in Schenectady, New York, thousands of turbochargers were produced every month, each meeting exacting specifications. Production lines included automated testing, rejecting defective units before they ever reached a bomber. Japanese attempts, by contrast, yielded perhaps dozens monthly, most failing after only a few operational hours. By August 1944, Japanese intelligence faced a sobering reality. Reports compiled from captured crewmen, wreckage analysis, and pilot observations painted a picture that shook military planners. the B-29 was not simply a large bomber. It was a flying weapon system incorporating innovations Japan could not match. Colonel Takushiro Hattori, operations officer at Imperial General Headquarters, recorded in his diary the implications of these raids. American bombers operated with impunity at altitudes Japanese fighters could not reach effectively. Those few interceptors that did manage to engage often found their attacks futile. B-29s were rugged, and even hits that might destroy a Japanese aircraft left the Superfortress flying. The mathematics of interception now favored America catastrophically. A fighter climbing from sea level to 30,000 feet burned roughly a third of its fuel, and performance at altitude fell sharply. Guns, deadly only at close range, demanded that pilots close within a few hundred feet, an almost impossible maneuver against B-29s equipped with advanced fire control systems. Even successful engagements often cost irreplaceable pilots, lost to crashes after sustaining damage or exhausting fuel. Major Makoto Ogawa, who would eventually claim 7 B-29 kills, later described the overwhelming disadvantage Japanese aviators faced. American crews operated in pressurized, heated cabins, while Japanese pilots endured temperatures 40 degrees below zero, fingers numb despite electrically heated flight suits that rarely worked. Oxygen systems malfunctioned, guns froze, ammunition belts jammed, and engines ran so rough that flameouts loomed constantly. Japanese aircraft designers sought desperate remedies. The Nakajima Ki-87, conceived as a high-altitude B-29 interceptor, boasted a turbo-supercharged Nakajima Hei 219 engine intended to reach above 30,000 feet with heavy armament of 30mm and 20mm cannons and enough speed to overtake the bombers. On paper, it seemed formidable, a service ceiling above 40,000 feet, weapons to pierce any Superfortress. In reality, only a single prototype flew before the war ended in April 1945. Its turbocharger, cobbled from inadequate materials and lacking thorough testing, failed repeatedly. When it did work, performance was inconsistent. The program died not for lack of engineering brilliance, but because Japan lacked the industrial capacity to build reliable turbochargers. The Tachikawa Ki-94, another ambitious high-altitude interceptor, never advanced beyond the mock-up stage. Meanwhile, the Mitsubishi J-8M, a rocket-powered aircraft modeled on the German Me-163 Comet, promised the ability to climb without turbochargers. But its lethal combination of unstable rocket fuel and barely a few minutes of endurance rendered it wholly impractical against the relentless B-29 raids. Japan's most brilliant aeronautical minds understood what was needed, but their industrial foundation could not produce it. American B-29 operations pressed forward without pause. By November 1944, the 21st Bomber Command flew relentlessly from the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, all barely 1,500 miles from Tokyo. On November 24th, Robert K. Morgan led 111 Superfortresses against the Musashino aircraft engine plant in the heart of Japan's capital. Weather and jet stream winds limited physical damage, but the psychological blow was immense. American bombers now struck Japanese soil almost daily, while local defenses proved increasingly powerless. Sergeant Shoichi Suzuki, an anti-aircraft gunner stationed near Tokyo, chronicled the growing despair in his diary. Initially, his unit engaged B-29 formations with cautious confidence, firing 75 middle shells skyward to 25,000 feet. Yet the bombers often soared higher, beyond gun range, or approached at angles that allowed almost no time to track. Even when direct hits occurred, they rarely brought down the massive aircraft. B-29s, built with redundant systems and armored in critical areas, could absorb punishment that would have obliterated any Japanese fighter. Suzuki wrote of crippled bombers trailing smoke, engines failing, yet pressing onward to their targets, or even returning safely to Saipan, Tinian, or Guam. Japan's attempts to respond centered on fighter performance. The Kawasaki Ki-61 Heian could reach altitudes near 32,000 feet, higher than most Japanese aircraft. But climb rate lagged, and engine reliability remained so poor that many were grounded awaiting spare parts. The Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate, introduced in 1944, was Japan's finest mass-produced fighter, powered by the intricate Homar radial engine. On paper, it promised speed near 400 mph at 20,000 feet, a service ceiling of 35,000 feet, and heavy armament of 20 mm and 30 mm cannons. In practice, however, quality control problems, low-grade fuel, crude lubricants, and poor maintenance meant most operational Ki-84s performed far below these specifications. American pilots who flew captured Ki-80 hours after the war praised their handling and power, but these aircraft were carefully preserved examples, meticulously maintained by skilled Japanese mechanics using hoarded materials. Ordinary operational fighters could not match the B-29's altitude, armor, or firepower. Even when Japanese fighters reached the B-29's heights, they confronted the Superfortress's terrifying defensive systems. 10 50-caliber machine guns in remote-controlled turrets, coordinated by a central fire control system that calculated lid and deflection with remarkable precision. To approach a formation meant flying into a deadly gauntlet of overlapping fire. For Japanese pilots, this was psychologically shattering. Trained to believe in Japan's aerial superiority and the invincibility of Bushido's spirit, they now faced the reality of an enemy fortress in the sky. Captain Yasuhiko Kuroe, a veteran of the 302nd Air Group, later wrote that attacking B-29s felt like striking a fortress. These bombers absorbed punishment that would destroy a dozen Japanese aircraft. Their crews, shielded by armor and redundant systems, operated at high altitude, while Japanese pilots flew fragile, unarmored fighters with exposed fuel tanks and minimal protection. December 1944 brought the first major daylight raid on Tokyo. 86 B-29s attacked the Musashino plant. Japanese defenses did manage to damage or destroy several bombers, but at staggering cost. The 244th Sentai, under Captain Kobayashi, claimed 6 B-29s destroyed using desperate ramming attacks. These suicidal maneuvers became increasingly common as pilots realized conventional attacks failed against the colossal bombers. Fighters were aimed at wings or tail assemblies, hoping to disable control surfaces before the pilot could bail out. Survival was rare. American crews, though horrified, respected the fanatical courage of the attackers. Technical Sergeant John McLaughlin, a gunner aboard City of Los Angeles, later recalled witnessing a Japanese fighter deliberately ram a nearby B-29. The bomber's tail was sheared away. Both aircraft plummeted in uncontrollable spins. No parachutes were seen. The 10-man B-29 crew died instantly. The Japanese pilot was never identified, one of countless defenders lost against a technologically insurmountable foe. By early 1945, Japanese air defenses were near collapse. Fuel shortages grounded many fighters. Experienced pilots had been slaughtered, replaced by minimally trained teenagers, powerless against seasoned B-29 crews. American fighter escorts, the P-51 Mustangs, operating from Iwo Jima after its capture in March 1945, sealed Japan's fate. Japanese interceptors climbing to altitude were easy prey for Mustangs that outclimbed, outran, and outfought them. The night of March 9 to 10, 1945, would become the darkest in Japan's history. General Curtis LeMay, commanding the 21st Bomber Command, enacted a radical shift. Instead of precision bombing from high altitude, 334 B-29s attacked Tokyo at night, flying around 7,000 feet and carrying incendiary bombs designed to ignite fires. The decision was risky. Lower altitudes exposed the bombers to heavier anti-aircraft fire, yet LeMay's calculation proved devastatingly accurate. The lower altitude eliminated turbocharger strain, reduced engine overheating, and allowed each bomber to carry vastly more ordnance. In just 3 hours, nearly 2,000 tons of incendiaries rained down on Tokyo's crowded districts. Firestorms erupted, generating winds that sucked oxygen from shelters and incinerated everything in their path. Temperatures exceeded 800 degrees Fahrenheit. The human toll was catastrophic. An estimated 100,000 perished, far more than either of the atomic bombs would later claim. 16 square miles of Tokyo burned to ash. Remarkably, only 14 B-29s were lost in a raid of such intensity. The firebombing proved a stark truth. Even without exploiting its high-altitude advantage, the B-29 could utterly devastate Japan. Yet, it was the Turbo-Superchargers that made this force possible. Without the ability to operate at extreme altitudes above weather, beyond the reach of fighters, the strategic bombing campaign would have been impossible. Long missions from China to Kyushu demanded engines that could breathe efficiently in thin air. Daylight precision strikes on aircraft factories and oil refineries relied on altitude as a shield. Even low-level incendiary raids were feasible only because earlier high-altitude operations had already established American air supremacy by destroying Japanese fighter production. Japanese engineers who examined captured B-29 components after the war expressed a bitter admiration. Turbochargers embodied everything Japan's war-weakened industry lacked: precision manufacturing, advanced alloys, rigorous quality control, and the capacity to produce thousands of complex units every month. A single B-29 contained 8 turbochargers. By 1945, American production exceeded 200 B-29s per month, meaning 1,600 new turbochargers monthly, not counting thousands more for maintenance and replacement. General Electric's factories achieved this with efficiency Japan could never have matched, even if it devoted its entire aircraft engine industry to turbocharger production. The implications were unmistakable to Japanese observers. If America could mass-produce turbochargers, what else could it produce? The answer became visible in waves of B-29s over Japan, P-51 escorts that annihilated Japanese fighters, a naval blockade cutting off supplies, and eventually the atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. First Lieutenant Toshio Ota, a technical intelligence officer, later wrote that examining captured American aviation technology induced despair among Japan's engineers. Every system, every component revealed precision and engineering sophistication beyond Japan's reach. Turbochargers, simple in concept but extraordinarily demanding in execution, were the clearest example. Even with designs acquired in 1941, Japan lacked the industrial base to build them in numbers that mattered. The human cost of this technological gap was staggering. Japanese pilot training, once rigorous and producing elite aviators, had collapsed by 1945. Fuel shortages restricted student pilots to perhaps 50 hours of flight time, compared to 200-300 hours for their American counterparts. These undertrained teenagers flew obsolete aircraft against opponents, enjoying every advantage. In July 1945, during a major battle over the inland sea, Japanese fighters attacked a formation of over 100 B-29s. Records show perhaps 2 bombers damaged, while Japanese forces lost 23 fighters with minimal effect on the enemy. By the war's end, the B-29 campaign had dropped 147,000 tons of bombs on Japanese targets, destroyed 40% of urban industrial areas in 66 cities, and killed an estimated 330,000 civilians. War production collapsed entirely by summer 1945. Transportation networks were shattered, preventing movement of resources. Factories were abandoned. Industries dispersed or ceased operation, and the government lost control of economic planning. Major General Arasue Seizo, chief of Japanese military intelligence, later admitted that by June 1945, his analysts recognized defeat as inevitable. American air supremacy was absolute, yet Japan's government, constrained by military honor codes forbidding surrender, continued to fight until atomic bombs provided justification. Hiroshima fell on August 6, 1945, and Nagasaki on August 9. Both were delivered by B-29s, aircraft whose ability to reach targets and return safely depended fundamentally on turbo-superchargers. The Enola Gay, flying at 31,000 feet over Hiroshima, owed its altitude capability to 8 General Electric turbochargers, each maintaining engine power in thin air. Even with defenses largely gone, altitude remained a shield against lingering anti-aircraft fire and allowed crews to escape the worst effects of the blast. Post-war interviews with Japanese pilots revealed a consistent theme: admiration mixed with frustration. They respected American engineering and recognized that no level of pilot skill could overcome this technological disadvantage. Lieutenant Isamu Sasaki, one of Japan's highest-scoring B-29 aces with 3 confirmed kills, later reflected that his successes required perfect conditions: surprise attacks from above, sun behind him, isolated bombers, and favorable separation from formations. Even the best Japanese pilots rarely succeeded against well-defended high-altitude B-29s. High-altitude aviation had been pursued by many nations before World War II. Germany experimented with turbochargers, but deployed only mechanical superchargers operationally, simpler but far less efficient at extreme altitudes. Britain relied on sophisticated multi-stage mechanical superchargers, providing good performance without the complexity of turbo-supercharging. America alone standardized turbochargers on heavy bombers, accepting additional cost and maintenance for unprecedented high-altitude capability. This decision reflected industrial confidence, precision manufacturing, skilled mechanics, steady spare parts, supply all infrastructure America possessed, and Japan did not. Even perfect Japanese designs in 1941 would have been useless without the industrial base, maintenance organization, and supply system to support them. The post-war U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey concluded decisively that the B-29 campaign had destroyed Japan's capacity to wage war. While historians debated whether surrender would have occurred without the atomic bombs or an invasion, they unanimously agreed that by August 1945, American air supremacy was complete and Japanese defenses shattered. Turbo-superchargers and the high-altitude capability they enabled made this outcome inevitable. Japanese records captured after the war confirmed how profoundly B-29 raids had dominated military planning from late 1944 onward. The Imperial General Headquarters poured vast resources into air defense. Fighter units were pulled from distant theaters, thousands of anti-aircraft positions were constructed, and tens of thousands of troops trained to defend airfields. Every effort, however, proved futile against bombers operating beyond effective defensive reach. The final B-29 mission against Japan flew on 14th August 1945, just one day before the surrender was announced. More than 300 Superfortresses struck targets near Tokyo, encountering no opposition. Japanese fighters stayed grounded, conserving fuel for the anticipated American invasion that never came. B-29 crews returned to their Mariana bases, unaware that the war was already effectively over. Their mission had been accomplished not in a single flight, but through the cumulative destruction wrought by hundreds of raids Japan could neither prevent nor counter. In the decades that followed, aviation historians and aeronautical engineers dissected the B-29's technological advantages. Their conclusions were unanimous. Turbo-supercharging provided the fundamental capability that made strategic bombing from remote bases feasible. Without it, B-29s would have been constrained to altitudes around 20,000 feet, well within reach of Japanese fighters, and anti-aircraft fire and losses would have been catastrophic. The entire concept of bombing Japan from the Marianas would have been impractical. The lessons Japanese engineers gleaned from examining captured American technology shaped post-war industrial development. Precision manufacturing, rigorous quality control, and systematic engineering hallmarks of American turbo-supercharger production became cornerstones of Japan's post-war economic miracle. Former aviation engineers migrated to civilian industries, bringing invaluable expertise in advanced manufacturing. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress flew its last combat mission in 1954 during the Korean War. By then, jet-powered bombers were replacing propeller-driven aircraft, and turbo-supercharging for piston engines had become obsolete. Yet the B-29's legacy endured. It proved that technological superiority could overcome numerical inferiority, that industrial capacity could rival bravery, and that air power alone could cripple a nation's ability to wage war. Today, only 2 B-29s remain airworthy, preserved by dedicated organizations. When these aircraft roar across the sky at air shows, few spectators realize the hidden marvels within their engine nacelles. Turbo-superchargers spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute, compressing air to maintain engine power in thin, high-altitude atmosphere. These components, designed 8 decades ago, still perform their original function, a living testament to engineering that helped end the deadliest conflict in human history. The story of Japanese forces confronting B-29 Superfortresses illustrates a fundamental truth of modern warfare. Industrial capability and technological innovation often determine outcomes more than courage or numbers alone. The turbo-superchargers, the industrial system producing thousands of them, the crews trained to use them, and the supply chains keeping them operational. These were the true weapons of the strategic bombing campaign. The B-29's technological superiority did not guarantee American victories at the war's outset. But once American industry mobilized, once B-29 production reached full scale, once the Marianas became operational, defeat for Japan became inevitable. No skill, no sacrifice could offset the material and technological advantages embodied in those silver bombers. When B-29s cruised at 30,000 feet over Japan, their turbochargers silently spinning within the engine nacelles, maintaining sea-level power in the stratosphere, they carried more than bombs. They carried proof that industrial might had become decisive in modern warfare, and that America possessed that might in a measure no enemy could match. Japan never anticipated this reality, and once the silver bombers filled the skies over the home islands, operating beyond defensive reach, nothing remained to stop them.